Hey, what's going on, YouTube? I'm Jared Komrowski, the founder of Thrifty Traveler, and with me I have Kyle Potteter, our editor-in-chief here at Thrifty Traveler. So I'm going to be kind of emceeing today's event, and Kyle's going to be talking all about his trip to Washington, D.C. He flew from Minneapolis to Washington, D.C. yesterday morning on American Airlines, and he flew back on Delta later in the afternoon. So he's going to talk a little bit about, what he saw at the airport, what the flights were like, what some differences that he saw in the two airlines, as well as, what were lounges like, or just what is it like out there? And then we're definitely going to be fielding any questions that you guys have. I guess I really want to encourage, if you have any questions whatsoever about, what is it like to fly? What should people expect? And then, if you have just any kind of travel questions, during these very strange times, throw them our way. And I know either Kyle or I should, have no problem answering a majority of them. And if we don't know the answers, we'll point you in the right direction to find the solution to those questions. So yeah, Kyle, let's just start it out. What was flying yesterday morning like?
So it was a long day yesterday. I woke up at about 4, and I got home at about 8 p.m., 4 a.m. to 8 p.m. And from 4 until this moment, I've been trying to come up with a word for what it's like to travel. And I kind of drawing a blank. It's surreal. It's very strange. Last year I flew, close to 100,000 miles, and this flight by far was the strangest one that I've ever taken. These flights, really from start to finish, everything about the travel experience is just so much different now. So let's start just at the airport. I mean, the first thing that you'll notice is that airports are just empty. I think everyone feels and has seen the numbers about just how much travel demand it has grown within the past couple of months. But we're still, just seeing a fraction of the amount of travelers moving through United States airports right now. And that really, really shows. I mean, you have so much more space than you would ever have. It helps that I flew on a Tuesday. Tuesday is one of the lowest travel days, along with Wednesday and Saturday. And so I would say for people who really want to make sure, hopefully have some extra space throughout the airport, maybe even on the flight, flying on one of those days is going to be key. But in general, there are just so few people in airports everywhere. I mean, going to check in through the airport security at TSA, in lounges everywhere. I mean, it just feels really empty, and that's strange.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I know I haven't been on a plane, since early March, and I keep thinking about, what is it going to be like? And I picture, these empty airports. And I know you said, traveling on a Tuesday, generally, even without COVID or any of the issues we're going through right now, would be quiet. But to see it like a ghost town just kind of reaffirms what I think it would be like.
Yeah, it's really eerie. The biggest thing that stands out to me is, I know you've been in the Delta Sky Club at MSP. That's our home airport. At the kind of the F&G concourse, it's their main lounge, and it gets absolutely packed to the gills. Like, can't even find a seat sometimes because there are just so many business travelers moving through that airport, and almost all of them fly Delta. So that lounge just gets so crowded. I went there yesterday morning. Stayed there for about an hour. I saw 6 people, and 3 of them were Delta Lounge employees. It was just absolutely surreal, like kind of a Twilight Zone moment almost of just how empty it was. And that's kind of comforting in a way. You don't have to worry about getting a seat. You don't have to worry about social distancing. Just the sheer volume of people that solved that problem for you. But it's still just really, really strange.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to throw up we've never tried this before, but I'm gonna try to throw up some of the images that you took yesterday on the screen, and we'll see if we break YouTube by doing this. Um, but yeah, and if someone on the team can let me know if those of you at home can see the image I just dropped on the screen, that'd be great. But yeah, just like those lounges, especially at MSP, I mean, are completely just packed. Like sometimes you can't even find a seat. and to see, where there's literally almost no one. It's just such a strange, crazy, crazy concept.
Yeah. And so, just to explain what's happening here, I mean, while the number of travelers that we see each day in the United States has been going up for the last couple of months, those are not business travelers. Business travelers that, have Delta status or are more likely to have a credit card that gets them into a lounge or pay for a lounge membership. Those people are still staying home because, corporations are not paying for travel right now. They don't want to risk it. So yeah, lounges are just completely empty. The Sky Club, the Delta Sky Club at DCA in Washington D.C. also completely empty. I mean, I saw 4 or 5 people there throughout the course of, I think I was there 3 hours. So it's kind of wild, and it really underscores the question of should you be traveling right now? Don't know whether this makes someone think, well, that sounds great. But the fact of the matter is that people in general just are not traveling nearly as often or as much as they used to for a good reason, right? But ultimately, this is a personal decision. So, kind of what we wanted to do with, doing this YouTube live, putting a story out at thriftytraveler.com, and, all of the articles and YouTube videos that we're going to be doing on this experience is giving people, the information that they need to make an informed decision about, whether it's the right time to travel. And part of that is definitely just what this experience is like now.
All right, so Kyle, so the images were working, and people could see I shared a photo of the MSP Sky Club, the Delta Sky Club, as well as the one at Ronald Reagan in Washington, D.C. So everybody at home did get to see those. Obviously, very strange, especially those of you who have been out there. We're also getting a lot of questions, so I'm going to throw some questions for you, Kyle, right up on the
Yeah.
screen. And I know you can't see them, Kyle, but I can, so I will read them. Gene asks, so lounges are open. So obviously we talked about Delta Sky Clubs. Can you maybe speak a little bit about, like United's lounges or Americans or, even some for some international carriers, if you could give us kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah. The general rule of thumb right now is that if it's an airline's kind of major hub, MSP is obviously a major Delta hub. They'll probably keep at least one lounge open, generally only one. A lot of the smaller satellite clubs, for example, United's club at MSP is closed. I believe Americans is too. So as you get out beyond the hubs, it's unlikely that you're going to find an airline lounge that's open. There are exceptions, especially with some of the big international departures for international carriers. But don't expect to see a lot of lounges open outside of an airline's hub. And then you get into kind of more of the independent lounges, and the Amex Centurion lounges, which we love, those are all closed right now across the nation, and we're really not sure when those might reopen. And as far as I know, all of the escape lounges, including the one at MSP, our home airport, those are closed as well. So a lot of these smaller independent lounges are closed. Once you start talking about Priority Pass, if you have a Priority Pass lounge membership through a credit card, that gets a little trickier because each of these lounges gets to decide whether to stay open or closed. And to be honest, I'm not sure how many of those are open at this point in the US. But, the general rule of thumb is going to be outside of the big hubs, not a lot is open.
Yeah, it's wild, and obviously a very good question. So thanks, Gene. So we're going to keep going through these questions, and I just want to encourage everybody out there. So Kyle Potter, our editor in chief at Thrifty Traveler, he flew yesterday from Minneapolis to Ronald Reagan in Washington, D.C. Ronald Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. On American, and then he flew back on Delta. So he's just kind of talking about his experience, whether it's going through security, lounges, just the experience at the airport, and then what it was like to fly. So as we kind of go through all of these different, just parts of a normal travel day here, domestic travel here in the U.S., I definitely want to encourage, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. We're going to throw them up on the screen, kind of like Max's comment here. And we're happy to answer as many of these as we can get through. So Max asks, this is right when he got, to the airport. Was there both TSA PreCheck and Clear, because you would think, with no lines, Clear doesn't make any sense right now. So could you talk a little bit about that, Kyle?
Yeah, both were open. Both, obviously the standard line is open at all times, and at MSP and Reagan in DC, both Clear and PreCheck were open as well. In both kind of in all of the check-in areas that I check-in in security areas that I went through. There are so few business travelers right now, like we talked about before with lounges. These are the people that are more likely to have TSA PreCheck, and they're also the people that are far more likely to pay for Clear. I guess I can't say for sure whether Clear is worth it. I think we've both had trouble with Clear actually getting backed up because there are so many business travelers that pay for it and use it. In this case, I walked straight up to a kiosk. It's really nice to just kind of put your eyes up and have them scan. You don't need to touch anything. The only thing you need to do is take out your boarding pass or your phone with your mobile boarding pass on it and get it scanned on the Clear kiosk, and then you're good to go. So there's no need to even worry about showing a TSA agent anything that you've got, which is really nice. So it's kind of a mixed bag with Clear, but yeah, I would expect those to continue open, for the foreseeable future here.
Awesome. And just to thank you guys, we're getting so many comments and so many questions, and we're going to continue to try to answer as many of these as possible. So just kind of another question. I know Kyle, we've heard this a lot from either Thrifty Traveler Premium subscribers or just general questions, in our help inbox or through social media. Before, they advise, get to the airport 2, 3, 4 hours early due to lines, etc. So Gene asks, I'm flying to Kalispell, Montana tomorrow. Do you need to get to the airport earlier than 90 minutes? How long did it take you, Kyle, to get through security?
So, the caveat is I have both Clear and PreCheck. I got through security in less than 2 minutes. That said, that was a Tuesday, a very early Tuesday morning. So my experience is probably not quite typical. But even the standard lines that I saw were never more than 10 or 12 people deep, if that. At Washington D.C. Reagan on Tuesday afternoon, there was never more than 2 or 3 people at any of the security gates that I saw. So 90 minutes. You got to do what you're comfortable with, really. The worst thing in the world would be to play it too close and end up missing your flight. So whatever you're comfortable with, but just know that in general, these security lanes are pretty empty because so few people are traveling.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your experience boarding the flight at the gate. What did you see that was different from all of those flights that you've taken, back in 2019 or even earlier this year? I guess what was the first thing that you're like, whoa, this is a little different?
There's two sides to that coin. The first is that, some airlines have done more than others to try to improve that process and make it more safe. So I'm going to start with the good side. Flying back home, I flew Delta, and Delta has decided, it's going to board the plane from back to front to limit how many people are passing each other when they get through. Delta also at DCA had markers kind of in the boarding area to try to get people to space out 6 feet for social distancing. And when people started to kind of bunch together, the agent working the gate came over the intercom and, gave people a reminder, please, everyone, just make sure you give each other at least 6 feet of space for social distancing. Earlier in the day, I boarded my American Airlines flight, and, there's always going to be problems just with human nature of people just forgetting to give each other space or falling into their old habits. But American is still boarding the plane as normal in 9 groups, first class and priority people first, basic economy last. So they haven't done anything to this point to limit how people pass each other while boarding the plane. I can't say for sure, but I didn't really hear the agent come over from AA to tell people to space out a little bit more. And there were also no markers, at the gate area for people to do that. So, people bunched up on both flights. It's just going to happen. That is unavoidable. Americans in particular, for some reason, just suck at boarding airplanes. That said, I think Delta has done a lot more to make it a smoother and safer process than American has. In my experience, I took two flights, one on each airline. That those might not have been representative of how those airlines are really doing it, but that's how it seems to me.
Yeah, and if you want to talk just very briefly, I think it's important for people to know, and you've touched on it, how Delta is definitely trying to do things, at least from appearance, for appearance's sake, as safely as possible. And they've really started to gravitate towards like that safety, trying to get people, on board their aircraft, even from a price perspective. I mean, let's be honest, our team looks at thousands, tens of thousands of fares every single day, and for domestic flights, I mean, Delta's charging more than American. American has, really changed their strategy. I mean, we're seeing the lowest fares we've ever seen on American Airlines flights, or just fares in general in the United States domestically, where Delta is charging a little bit of a premium. Yeah, could you just talk a little bit more about that? Because what it seems like is there's been a divergence in the last, especially 30 to 60 days of safety
Yeah,
versus price.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so to start with, the U.S. government has done little to nothing to set standards for air travel and air travel safety in light of coronavirus. They really haven't done a lot. So that means that the airlines are free to do as they choose, to do what they think is going to be best for customers or best for their business. And as you said, Delta and American have taken completely different paths, and that really showed in this experience. That's exactly why I decided to fly AA out to DC and fly Delta back. American, starting as of today, has said they will sell flights to 100% capacity. That doesn't mean your American Airlines flight is going to be full. It just means that it can be. And in my experience, my flight was, 80, probably 80-ish% full. As my flight started to fill up, I decided, you know what? That extra space is worth more to me. So I paid for a main cabin extra seat to move up into a section that wasn't quite as crowded, to make sure I had a little more space. That's not always going to be an option when American sells out the flight completely. And American has not said that they have said that they will not block middle seats to give people more space. And right now, that is really Delta's entire play. That is their strategy. They are saying, you know what? We don't think people care about price right now. That's not what's stopping them from traveling. It's the concept of being safe. And so Delta has committed, and in my case, they honored that commitment to block middle seats on every single seat, on every single plane. And they are capping how many tickets they sell per flight in order to do that. And that is really just kind of the hallmark of Delta's strategy. And as you noted, they are charging more, in order for those flyers who want to feel more comfortable, whether it makes them safer or not. It makes you feel safer. And in my case, it definitely made me feel safer. I think probably my biggest takeaway from this experience is if I had to sit next to someone I didn't know on a plane, I wouldn't go. That's my personal takeaway from it. Everyone is going to feel differently about it. To me, it doesn't matter whether it's 6 feet or 16 inches, with a middle seat. I don't want to be bumping elbows and shoulders with a stranger where I don't know where they've been or what they might have been exposed to. It's a matter of peace of mind for me. And that's, I am a test case for why Delta's strategy can work, because it absolutely worked for me. Just my opinion, but yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that whether you choose to fly Delta, and pay a little bit more for safety, or you're just going for the cheapest flight, flying American, and if you're comfortable, sitting next to somebody, it's all about your personal level of comfort right now. Not one isn't right and one isn't wrong. Thankfully, we have choices about who we want to fly, which companies we're comfortable, flying with. So we're just, we're not trying to say, Delta good, American bad. That's not really kind of the goal here. While Kyle, feels more comfortable with the safety aspect of Delta, We more than understand, or I can more than understand, why someone would want to, fly American as well. So we're just trying to tell you kind of what the experience is like. It's a deeply personal position, whether you want to even travel right now. So just telling you what it's like out there. For those of you guys who are just joining us, because I know we just got quite a few new people, I'm Jared Komrowski, the founder of Thrifty Traveler, and I'm with Kyle Potter, our editor-in-chief, and he flew to Washington Reagan National Airport yesterday. And he flew there on American in the morning and he flew home on Delta. So he's just talking about the whole experience of just a normal travel day. And he didn't leave the airport, but he just kind of was just trying to gather as much of what the flying and travel experience is like. So we've gotten, quite a few questions about just like general questions, Kyle. K&M asks, what kind of restaurants were open, here in MSP, as well as, at Ronald Reagan in DC. Kind of what did you see?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, and I think it's going to depend heavily on when you're at the airport. A lot of places have just kind of closed indefinitely. Other places have really restricted their hours to be open just for peak times. I would say that kind of the general rule of thumb is, most coffee shops and fast food or fast casual restaurants, those are more likely to be open. It's kind of more of the sit down places, the nicer spots where those are far more likely to be closed. That was my experience at both MSP and DCA, Reagan in Washington, D.C. A lot of those, nicer sit-down restaurants in the airport have closed and have, to me, looked like they hadn't been open for a while.
It's to be expected. Um, let's see. Let's transition a little bit more to kind of, what was the onboard experience like? We've gotten a few questions, and I'm going to put one up on the screen related to, what the level of service was like, both in economy, which you flew both ways, as well as what you know about kind of business and first class. So if we can just talk about kind of your experience on a economy domestic flight, and then a little bit more about what you know about domestic first class as well as international business class. Now, let's keep it super general, and kind of get through it as quickly as we can to move on to the next question, because I know that's a huge open-ended one.
Yeah. So again, it really varied by which airline I was flying with. On American, the service was non-existent, basically. The flight attendants were certainly nice. But there was no drinks. There was no kind of prepackaged bag with water or snacks or anything. They came through the cabin maybe twice throughout the course of the flight to collect garbage that we had kind of brought with us. So, I don't know if that's going to be typical. This was a 2-hour flight. If you're flying more than 2 hours, maybe you get more with American. But, I would certainly prepare by bringing whatever drinks and snacks and water you might need. Delta. As I walked on board, I got a Purell wipe to kind of wipe down my space again. It already seemed very clean to me, as did American, but that was nice. And then shortly after takeoff, a flight attendant came through the aisle with prepackaged plastic bags with a small bottle of water, some almonds, some pita chips, a small container of Purell hand sanitizer, and a napkin. So safe to say that all airlines have drastically limited how much service they're doing just to try to avoid contact between flight attendants and passengers. But, even then, it really varies based on who you're flying. And then, as you get into the front of the plane, alcohol service in general is gone right now. Delta is changing that as of tomorrow. They're going to start serving beer and wine to domestic first class passengers. And then, so far as I know, if you're flying international, up at the front, first or business class, it's not normal. It's not like it was before with pre-departure champagne, but you can still get wine and spirits and beer if you're flying international, business, or first class right now.
And I know this is the biggest first world problem, but I know there's a lot of people out there that want to use their points and miles to fly, international first or business class. And they're asking themselves right now, is it worth my miles, to fly, like let's say Emirates first class? Can you even shower in Emirates first class? I'm probably not. I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't get champagne pre-departure. I don't know all of the rules with what Emirates is doing, but I mean, a lot of us work really hard to build up this, pile of, points and miles, and is right now the best time to use it? And I don't know the answers to these questions, but these are kind of tough questions because people want to get out into the world, and they might want to be in a lie flat seat, but is the juice worth the squeeze with using their miles?
Yeah, and especially if you can't really go anywhere as an American right now.
No.
Most countries do not want us. So I would say, certainly tomorrow is not the time to travel internationally and burn a bunch of points and miles on first and business class. As you look out longer term, this stuff is going to return. And then I think it becomes a question of how much has returned and what are you trying to get out of, using that big stash of points and miles? Is it the champagne and caviar that you care about? Then it's probably worth holding on to those for a bit longer, and waiting until this really returns to normal. If you really just want a good night's sleep as you cross the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans, then I think it's still a pretty easy choice. There's really only one way to do that, and it's with a lie flat business class bed.
All right. Well, thanks for your question, Aaron. Next question, Gene asks another great one, kind of one that I've been curious about. Um, Kyle, were you screened for temperature at any point during your day?
I was not. The airlines and airline employee unions have really been hammering, federal regulators, the CDC, TSA, even the FAA, to start doing this. Because, while it might not catch every single coronavirus case, it could certainly be helpful and just be helpful in stopping people who are ill with anything from getting on the plane. So far, they have not done that. So there is no kind of overarching requirement for it. And to my knowledge, the only airline that is doing this by themselves is Frontier. And yeah, I can't speak to what that's like. But yeah, throughout the course of my trip yesterday, my temperature was not checked once, aside from by myself. I did it at home before I left.
Yeah, we got at least two to three questions on this, and it's something that I guess kind of at a bare minimum you'd kind of expect. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's become really common in a lot of different countries, and for reasons I can't quite explain, our government wants no part of this whatsoever. So they've really been trying to put it back on airlines to do this themselves.
and I feel that could be a long discussion we could have
Yeah.
about that alone, because for those of you out there that have flown, especially to Southeast Asia, or just Asia in general, uh, as soon as you come into customs, the temperature checks, whether you're aware of them or not, are commonplace and just kind of standard procedure. And it, at least to my knowledge, is not necessarily being implemented, even arriving at the airport or coming through U.S. customs. So uh, we'll leave it at that. Um, Hey, Haley, as somebody who wants to travel very badly internationally, and would like for everything to return to normal, some of these basic ways that I feel personally, of course, that could help speed the recovery of so many things here in the US seem to not be implemented. I have to say,
Yeah.
at least that. All right, so Haley asks, um, at least in her experience, for Delta, not everyone wore masks in the gate area, but they had to wear masks on board. What was your experience specifically, Kyle, on both flights?
Yeah, on the plane, I did not see a single person not wearing a mask aside from when they were taking a sip of water or whatever drink they had with them. That was not an issue at all. We saw just a couple of weeks ago that, people were trying to get attention by boarding a plane without a mask right after airlines said they were going to, crack down on it. And I'm thankfully, everyone on these flights was wearing a mask. Throughout the airport, including at the gate, it was a little more spotty. I would say somewhere between 60 and 70% of people were wearing a mask, just as they were walking to and from, wherever they were trying to go. But again, it sucks, but, that's great for us because, our country has come to wearing masks during public health crises so late that it's become, a really stupid debate, that airlines are now on the front lines of. So to see, only 30% or so of people not wearing a mask just as they're walking through the airport was, unfortunately very encouraging.
The bar is quite low, sadly.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there, let's see, we're getting some great questions. And I just want to encourage everyone out there, as we're kind of discussing Kyle's whole experience of traveling domestic for the day. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. We'd love to throw them up on screen and then have Kyle answer them as we get through. I know we're getting quite a few, just it's all about kind of safety. I guess Kyle, if you want to just discuss what were the key things that you really noticed were the difference between flying American and then returning on Delta. And I know you've kind of touched on, safety and, it seemed like Delta, there was so many different changes from what you were used to. And on American, it was really kind of just business as usual for the most part. I guess, was that the biggest kind of stark difference?
Yeah, I think so. The two biggest ones that come to mind are the levels of service that, at least on my flights I got. American, it was nothing. Again, no water, no snacks, other than coming through the cabin to collect garbage. I really didn't see the flight attendants much at all. On Delta, we got that prepackaged bag with water and snacks and cleaning supplies. But still for me, the biggest thing is that, Delta has committed to blocking middle seats through the end of September. Whereas American is not doing that. They are selling flights now to capacity, which means, if you're getting on a plane, you're likely to be sitting next to someone you don't know. And that was not my case because I paid for, a more expensive seat to be able to sit alone and not be close to someone. But that's not always going to be an option. And certainly it's telling of the different strategies between the airlines of how they're trying to get more customers back.
Yeah, it's going to be incredibly interesting, as even in looking forward, 3 to 6 months and looking back, Delta has such a different strategy as far as clinging, I mean, with a focus on safety, and higher price, whereas American has a focus on incredibly low price and, really no changes. And to see, which one long term will be successful from a financial perspective as well as from a customer perspective. And obviously, those are very much intertwined. But that's the nerdy part of, it'll be very interesting to see. And I know, Kyle, you're very interested to see how that's all going to play out as well, because just such a stark difference in how these two airlines are kind of handling things. It'll be interesting to see how that's received by the traveling public.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We have a great question from Max, and I know we've heard this quite a few times. Which precautions that the airlines are currently implementing and incorporating into travel? So we talked about Delta, incorporating boarding from the back, um, masks, etc. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, Kyle, but it'll be interesting to see, how many of those will stay long term. Because as some airlines do in Europe, they do board from the back. It's
Hmm.
simply a more efficient way to board. And a lot of actually first class passengers don't actually want to sit on the aircraft the whole time. And as people filter in, into the aircraft, especially on international first class long haul, a lot of times first class is the last to board, or people choose to board last. Maybe I should say. So, what are you kind of what do you see and what do you think are some of these things that are super logical, maybe a little bit safer, and we might see some long term changes with.
Yeah, I think the thing that for sure is going to stick around probably permanently, if not, for a long time, is just the level of cleaning that planes go through between flights and especially overnight. Really every airline, including, the small budget carriers, has really stepped up how much they're cleaning the planes to, try to make sure they knock anything out of the plane on surfaces that they can. So I think that's probably here to stay. Boarding, I'm not sure. I think the fact that Delta is the only one that's currently boarding back to front, that kind of tells me that that's not going to stick around forever. I think it's probably, here for a while. I don't know what that is. That might be, another couple of months. That might be, even, 2, 3 years. But I don't think that that's going to be a permanent change. And then, the other one is masks, and that one I don't know. I think that's probably going to hinge on whether we reach some kind of cultural acceptance of masks, and we might see some kind of, maybe not a mask requirement, or we'll ban you from future flights like we have now, but a continued encouragement of passengers within the United States and abroad to wear masks when they're on the plane, except for when they're eating or drinking.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. And I do agree with you. It is very telling from the fact that, Delta bordering from, the back to the front, being one of the few airlines in the US that's kind of tinkering with this, very unlikely that that will continue just because that would be a source of confusion among the traveling
Mm,
public. Those of us who, maybe travel, 1 to 2 times a year to having a whole different boarding process from airline to airline might be just too big of a hurdle for Delta to adopt long term, even if it makes total sense. But we
yeah.
will see. All right, we have a great question from M, and this kind of has to do with the future of airline pricing. Will airline travel in the future become so expensive for travelers that it will become unaffordable? So Kyle, kind of what's your take on that? And I'll definitely add my 2 cents because I know we have a great YouTube video in this very channel here at Thrifty Traveler that's all about the future of airline pricing.
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball. Unfortunately, neither does Jared. But I think we both agree that no, it's not going to become unaffordable. There are so many airlines competing with each other, especially here in the United States, where we've got three major United States carriers plus, Southwest, JetBlue, Alaska, and then budget carriers even like Spirit and Frontier. Um, that level of competition lends itself to low prices, and that competition is not going to go away. I think the biggest thing probably to watch for is whether airlines like Norwegian survive this. I don't have any insight into that, but if Norwegian collapses, that they have pretty much single-handedly driven down airfare to Europe from the United States. So if they go out of business following other budget airlines like Primera and WoW Air that have already fizzled out, that's more problematic, I would say. And then as we get on the other side of this crisis, you start thinking about the ways that airlines try to drum up business, which they're really going to need right now. That business is basically just non-existent because people don't feel safe traveling. There are non-essential travel bans, and people just aren't interested in getting on a small metal tube and hurtling through the sky. As that changes, as people are less worried about safety, the one thing that airlines can do to get people back is cut the price. That's in good times, that is the impediment that stops people from traveling generally. So if and when that happens, depending on what that picture of competition between airlines looks like, that could be a powerful tool, not for higher prices, but lower prices. So I think we're pretty optimistic that cheap flights are not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think our initial predictions back in April when we start talking about the future of airline pricing, so many people were jumping in and being like, "Oh, prices are going to go through the roof because the airlines, fixed costs are X and they need to charge this much, to break even or be profitable." And then so many of these bloggers and websites, forget about the laws of supply and demand. I mean, you can't just charge as much as you want to remain profitable. That's not really how it works. So, like you said, long term, how many airlines survive? That is just going to be just absolutely the key because we really have no idea past a year, what this is going to look like. I mean, like we thought, in this near term, in the next 6 to 12 months, prices are going to be low. You've got to stimulate demand through price. I mean, getting people on board aircraft, obviously safety is one thing, but price, people are more price sensitive almost than anything. So what Delta's doing is kind of bridging that gap of trying to be safe and encourage people, we are the safe airline to fly on, come fly with us, pay a little bit more, but still, I mean, Delta's prices for domestic flights are still below the norm of what we would have saw, at this time last year, far below for peak summer, fares like we're seeing right now. And then American, like we've highlighted several times already, Americans pricing right now is one word to just describe it is just bonkers. I mean, you can fly from, of course, major airports like, Washington Reagan, where you were at yesterday, or Minneapolis, or even those small airports like Fargo, North Dakota, Grand Forks, North Dakota, Duluth, Minnesota, where you're used to paying exorbitant prices to fly anywhere. You can now fly to, much of the US for under $200 if you're, looking at flying in August or September. I mean, talk about stimulating demand through pricing. I mean, American is just doing a textbook version of it. I mean, they are dropping prices as low as they can to get as many bodies on their aircraft, to get their, employees working, get those planes back in the sky, and then kind of just reassess from there. So that's a lot of information. We have a great video that I recorded, so my bias is very obvious. But here on our YouTube channel, that's all about the future of airline pricing. It's more in depth than kind of the discussion that we've had. So all of you guys, probably follow Thrifty Traveler because you love cheap flights. That's what we're all about. So in the next 6 to 12 months, expect those cheap fares to keep popping up. Almost all of you guys out there are Thrifty Traveler Premium subscribers, so you love cheap flights. And we thank you for joining us to talk about cheap flights. So yeah, for you premium subscribers out there, we've rolled out those domestic deals. And as you've seen just over the last week since we've rolled it out, I mean, incredible fares from much of the United States. It doesn't even matter if you're on the West Coast or the East Coast. You can fly really anywhere in the US, regardless of distance, for really the same price, which, I mean, these are not normal times. So, if you're comfortable flying, you see a destination, or an airline that, you feel safe about traveling to, especially with some of those flexible booking policies are out right now, this is, in my humble opinion, probably one of the cheapest and most flexible times to book travel that there has ever been or probably ever will be. If you're comfortable getting out there, book the ticket because yeah, it's crazy. All right. We have another question, and let me put it up on the screen if I can. So great question here. With the amazing deals going on right now for future travel, do you feel hotels and airlines will provide some flexibility with credits or refunds if changes need to be made? So Kyle, let's talk a little bit about kind of what we're seeing as far as flexibility, cancellation for a voucher with airlines or even cancellation policies with hotels. Right now, for the most part, those flexible policies are very similar to what we saw, back in March and April, with some caveats. Where do you
Yeah.
kind of see this heading?
Yeah, so right now, let's do airlines first. Right now, all of the major US airlines have some policy that says if you book a ticket by the end of this month, July 31st, we will allow you to change that without paying a change fee or cancel it and get a voucher to use toward a future flight. And those vouchers are typically good for at least another year from the date you booked it. So that's unprecedented flexibility. And every single month airlines keep extending this another month out. And, we wrote a story a couple of months ago now about how, that's just probably not going to change. With all of the uncertainty, airlines are going to continue offering this flexibility to book a ticket and then change your mind and not, be out, $100, $200, $300 if you decide you need to cancel that trip. And, in most cases, hotels are actually doing even more. All of the big hotel chains, so far as I'm aware of, have gone even further and said, you can book even a non-refundable reservation as long as you do it, as long as you book that stay, within the next couple of months. I think a lot of them are kind of through September right now, for any stay, out as far as 2022. And if you decide to cancel, we'll give you your money back. So, it's even better for hotels. And again, until all of the uncertainty around travel clears up, I think this is, travel companies as a whole have just decided that this is the only way for them to get any money from people. Because, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm, planning a possible trip and it's going to cost me a few $100s, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to take that trip because it's just so unclear and uncertain. I'm not even going to book it, and I think that's probably pretty representative of the American consumer as a whole right now.
Kyle, but I do have one thing to say. What about if your flight from, for example, to Vegas, like on American right now, is 50 or $70?
Well, and that's the other thing is, if it's that cheap, it almost doesn't matter. But the good thing is that, as a general rule, all of them are still doing this anyway. And there's really only so far airlines can go. Like, I think we've probably hit the floor for American on how cheap domestic fares can get. I'm not sure how much. I mean,
Yeah.
pretty soon they're just going to be charging the $5.60 tax and fee, and that's it. So you fly
Government
round trip for
taxes, yeah.
$12. Yeah. No, but yeah, I really don't see these flexible policies going anywhere. And Jared, like you said before, that just makes it, whether you want to travel or not, if you're not comfortable with it, that's fine. This is totally a personal decision. But if you are and you're just unsure about how it works, that is great peace of mind and a reason to book future travel right now, because yeah, this flexibility and these cheap prices are definitely unprecedented.
I know some of this flexibility is one of the things that's kind of keeping me sane because I love planning future travel and flights. And, I do have 3 trips coming up, this fall and winter, going to Argentina, Chile, as well as South Africa. Will I probably go on those flights? Will Americans be allowed, to fly into, those different airports, international airports? Probably not for most of those flights. I won't be able to go. But thankfully, because of these, flexibility or flexible policies, I'll at least be able to either get a voucher for a future flight on those airlines or get a refund. And without that, I mean, there's just no way unless, like I said, I can get a flight for $50 where, it's not going to matter to me because the price is just so low, which I think for all of us, I mean, I don't want to lose $100, and I'm not going to book a flight unless I know I have that flexibility because there's just so many variables and we just have no idea what's going to happen. All
Yeah.
right, so thanks for that question, Andreas. That's a great one. Angela asks another really good question. Is it worth opening up a travel credit card right now? And I know, Kyle, you write up and you talk about credit cards all the time at thriftytraveler.com as our lead editor. Do you just want to kind of talk about, what are your kind of top prospects? Because, what we've seen is, American Express as well as Chase has, really pivoted and started to offer some new non-travel benefits for some of their travel cards. Whereas, Citi has really done, for the most part, next to
Not
nothing
much.
to offer additional benefits, or what's kind of a one card that you definitely recommend based on some of these the changes that have rolled out recently.
Yeah. So I think there are two or three most important things to think about. Number one, you got to make sure if you're going to open a travel credit card, you're not digging yourself into debt. There's no point in earning points and miles or cash back or whatever if you're paying interest. So as long as your financial situation means you can responsibly hit that two to four to $5,000 minimum spend requirement, go ahead on to the next step. If not, stop. This is not the time to do that. Consumer debt is a huge problem in this country. Then number two is, don't get a credit card right now anyway, that comes with a ton of travel benefits that you can't use. These cards, these premium travel credit cards that we love and we both have, like the Amex Platinum card, that has a $550 annual fee. When you can travel, a couple of times a month or, a few times a year even, and get into a lounge, use your TSA PreCheck or Global Entry membership, use, the airline fee credits and all of these things, those help justify the cost of that annual fee. But when you can't travel, it's just, what's the point? This is just not a promising time for a travel rewards credit card like that. And then the third part is just flexibility. Jared mentioned, Chase and Amex in particular have done a lot of new things to make your points more versatile so that when you can't travel, you can use them for other things. Chase in particular has the pay yourself back feature, which allows you to use your Chase points to pay off bills from grocery stores, hardware and home improvement stores and restaurants. And that's great because, if you have a pile of points that you've been accruing and you don't have a way to use them for travel right now, that gives you another option, and it's just as valuable as using them for travel in many cases. And so you add all that up, and that's why we wrote a story last week on the site that says the Chase Sapphire Preferred card is the best card for these times because the annual fee is relatively cheap for the value you get. You've got the flexibility to use those points for several different things. You also have the flexibility of being able to transfer them to many different airlines, which is also key. You're not saddling yourself to one airline. Just the value of that card is just really immeasurable, especially compared to, again, that low annual fee.
Yeah, I think that flexibility, as a team, we, at our weekly meetings or even daily meetings, we're always discussing, what is the number one card for people right now that makes just total sense because people are still spending, and they want to, use those points, possibly for future travel. But just the same, some of us have, earned hundreds of thousands of, for example, Chase Ultimate Rewards points, hoping that we're going to be able to book flights or hotels, with those points. And now you're like, what am I going to use them for? So I think, what Chase has done, allowing you to, use those points for like Target purchases, grocery stores, home improvement. I know almost every member of the team has used it for, grocery stores or just like dumb things that I never thought I'd use points for, like buying a new chainsaw. I bought a chainsaw for free with points and miles. And I was just like, what does this come to? But that's really cool. Whether you're buying stuff at Target or at Costco, or at the grocery store, using your points and miles to wipe that stuff off your statement, and looking at your statement, and those are some of the big expenses we have right now. And using your points and miles, maximizing it by cutting your expenses. That flexibility is it's just so key right now. And I think, everybody's focusing on saving as much as possible because it's just very strange, uncertain times. And I think Chase has really, hit it out of the park with that. And you can learn so much more about the Chase Sapphire Preferred card. We'll have Michaela put a link to the article that Kyle was discussing. And you can find more, at thriftytraveler.com. And just so you guys know, and I know a lot of you guys are out there as premium subscribers, another great way to support Thrifty Traveler is by signing up for your next Travel Rewards credit card at thriftytraveler.com. So now if you're considering signing up for a card, go to thriftytraveler.com. And if you can sign up through one of our links, that helps support all the work that we do and Kyle does every day. And we greatly appreciate that as well. All right, we'll keep moving on. Let's see. Some great questions. All right, Kyle, I know this is one that you and I actually just discussed earlier today, as well as the team. Max asks, what will Delta's hub route network look like at MSP in the future? And let's not just limit it to MSP. I think we can open this to a broader kind of statement to what our expectations are with, American and Delta and United as well, kind of into the future, kind of what are we seeing? Are airlines growing, long term, in the next year or two, or are we going to see kind of some shrinkage, especially at some of the main hubs of these big airlines?
Yeah, I think if you're talking domestic, I think, at some point we're going to get back to normal and probably sooner rather than later. Airlines really rely on flying domestically. I think the one possibility is that, where you might have had, 7 to 8 or even 10 options a day for flight times to fly from Minneapolis to Chicago, that might not come back. They might cut some of those frequencies. So, you might have to be a little bit more choosy with when you fly to a certain destination. The biggest changes are going to be on international. That applies to Delta, American, United, and all of the foreign carriers that fly here as well. And what we're going to see is airlines are going to, and already have, really scaled back to the biggest, most profitable hub-to-hub routes. So for Delta, if you're going to Europe, unless if you're flying from JFK to like a major business center, you're going to connect through Amsterdam or Paris. And then if you need to get elsewhere within Europe, you'll fly on one of Delta's partner airlines. Same is true with American and, flights into London and then, fly onward with British Airways. I think that's going to be kind of the new normal for a long time. For the past several years, we've seen, a ton of new routes on airlines. For example, American was planning on launching routes from Chicago nonstop to Budapest, Prague, and Krakow, Poland. They announced today that those routes are never going to happen. So especially those nonstop flights into Eastern Europe and even smaller destinations within Western Europe, those ones they might not ever come back. And really, kind of the same logic applies flying over to Asia. Although right now, most flights kind of go through some of the core cities, Japan or Tokyo, Seoul, Taipei, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Beijing. There aren't too many flights within Asia that don't first route through one of those cities. So that's not as big of a change.
All right. Yeah, great question, Max. And I know this is one that our team is currently discussing. We're getting all these press releases from all the different airlines, keeping track of, where things are at. It seems like, yeah, things are, we're kind of going back to, 2017, 2018, where the airline sizes are at least right now. And it'll be interesting to see what happens, in the next few months. All right. So we've got time for one last question. And I just want to say thank you to all of you premium subscribers and YouTube watchers out there for joining us in this YouTube live. It's great to answer all your questions about kind of the future and, safety of what we're seeing in just traveling domestically even, right now. And for those of you who are just joining us, Kyle flew to Washington National Reagan Airport yesterday from Minneapolis St. Paul Airport, and he flew there on American and back on Delta. So we're just talking about his whole experience throughout the day and answering your guys' questions. So I think this last one kind of will help tie things up. Kyle, did you feel safe on the flight itself? And then the second question is, what safety measures on the plane were apparent to you? And obviously you flew very different airlines that have different seating arrangements as far as Delta has, the blocked middle seats, whereas American does not. And you said, Kyle, that you paid a little bit extra on American to have a little bit more room because it did make you uncomfortable, understandably. Did you feel safe on both flights? And what safety measures were most apparent to you?
Yeah, I think the cleaning is pretty obvious to me personally. Aside from a kind of dirty bathroom on the AA flight, the planes were really clean, and so their commitment to cleaning their aircraft really shows. I would say I felt totally safe on both flights. If I were flying American or any other airline that does not guarantee me an empty middle seat, and I had to sit next to someone I didn't know, I would not feel safe. That doesn't mean I'm not safe. Social distancing is not an empty middle seat. Social distancing is 6 feet. So social distancing is, really impossible on an airplane. So, but it definitely, it occurred to me a lot throughout the flight, as I was sitting in my Delta seat, kind of looking over at my neighbor 2 seats over and thinking about him being right next to me. That, just for me personally, my anxiety would have been absolutely through the roof, and I would not be on a plane again anytime soon if I had to sit next to a stranger.
Yep, understandably. All right. Well, I just want to thank Kyle, obviously, for talking all about his experience flying domestically yesterday here in the US, as well as all of your amazing questions as Thrifty Traveler Premium subscribers out there. So many questions. Obviously, people are so curious about travel. And we're going to continue to do these YouTube live sessions, with premium subscribers, because we know you guys have so many questions, as a lot of you are well tenured travelers. We didn't get to all of your questions. So make sure, if you're not a member of the Facebook group, the Thrifty Traveler Premium Facebook group, definitely hop in there, drop your question in there. We'll try to get it approved as quickly as possible. But the group, I'm sure, would love to have more discussion about, Are you feeling safe traveling? What are you seeing on board, flights, whether it's, we talked about American, we talked about Delta, what are you seeing on United? What are you seeing on Sun Country, Frontier, Spirit, etc.? Let's continue this discussion into the group. And until then, yeah, we'll talk to you later and cheers to cheap flights. Thanks, guys.